Welcome to Standard Theory. In the previous segments we discussed the abnormal processes related to intimate and silent communication in horizontal thinking on the R scale. In this segment we will continue exploring the abnormal version of horizontal thinking by discussing social communication. In a constructive sense, the ninth characteristic of communication in social communication is related to a social identity. In social identity, a person will separate themselves from their own individuality in order to communicate something about a larger construct. During the abnormal manifestation of this process, a person will deal with a phenomenon known as shared identity disorder. This process is relevant to shared communication as well. For now, we will discuss the social version of this process. In shared identity disorder, a person may relate either their self or intimate identity to the social construct that they separate in order to refer to. In this sense, the social identity of the individual will become more prevalent than their self or intimate identity. For that reason, the information related to their separation of identity can take priority over self-communication and one-on-one communication. Since this occurs within the separation of identity, this process can be considered to be related to dissociation, especially as a preference for communication following dissociation. For those reasons, the lack of social identity or comparing the social identity to others can lead to an abnormal or non-standard termination of a communication cycle. The importance of these processes are also related to shared communication and absolute communication. To continue, the constructive version of the eighth characteristic is considered a social orientation. This is the reference to a specific subset of information within the social construct or within the social identity. In the deactivation or abnormal display of the social orientation, some part of that subset will replace another version of communication. In a general sense, this is a prelude to the condition known as addiction. According to the standard theory of psychology, addiction is defined as the reliance on external factors to take the place of any other characteristic or pattern of communication. In this sense, the experience of an external factor, whether that be an item, idea, organization, abstract or otherwise, can be considered constructive. However, once the experience of this factor consistently or repeatedly replaces another version of communication, whether in intelligence or impulse, that process is considered addiction. This is the replacement of another characteristic with the external factor. Next, we can discuss the deactivation of the seventh characteristic, which is constructively known as a social interaction. The process of social interaction relies on the interpretation of a social orientation by assigning either a low-energy or high-energy process to that orientation. In the deactivation or non-standard display of this characteristic, though, the tendency is to relate the outcome of that social factor another version of communication, especially the relation to an intimate process. This pattern of associating the interpretation of a social interaction as the product of a one-on-one process is known as social intimacy. In this process, one will relate the process of interpreting a social situation to another version of communication. This process falsely uses the high or low energy interpretation of an external factor to take the place of some other form of communication. This is especially true of other types of horizontal thinking. So far, we have discussed the abnormal versions of horizontal thinking from intimate communication, silent communication and social communication. Please join me in the next segment where we will continue to explore the abnormal version of the R scale in orthogonal thinking and shared communication.